There are two people on this that are above us that we're not sure if you know, but Dr. Shatila is the director of the MSW program, and Dr. Blakey is our director of the School of Social Work. Otherwise, the rest of us are in the room with you. Maybe you'll start back there with an introduction.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Madison. I'm one of the practicum coordinators. Glad to have you here.
Sure. I'm Katie Cobb. I'm also a practicum coordinator.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ashley Aggie. I am also a practicum coordinator, specifically for the child welfare students.
Rosetta Cheers is recording today for us, and Kelly Leaf has walked out of the room. Will you introduce yourselves and who or where you are from, and if you have a foundation or a specialization student or both? Today, what we want to do, our mission here today is to provide you with information and resources to enhance your feedback to the student, feedback to us, your evaluation of the students and of us, and really to focus on the culmination of the relationship that you have with your student, and ensure that we stay engaged throughout the internship. Your student may want to not stay engaged, and that's a normative, natural thing, and we have to work and put a lot of effort into keeping them engaged until the last day. We have some empty seats and we expected them to be filled. Maybe it's because of the beautiful weather, but thank you for being here and participating in this with us. And we'll welcome whoever walks in the door late. We are approaching the end or the middle, I think the middle of our spring semester. And it doesn't feel like we've had winter, but it is still February, and we anticipate a lot of wonderful things to still happen at your internships. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about all of that and all that could happen, and we hope that we give you some ideas on what you might implement with your students moving from here to the termination space. This is a collage of faces. Some of us are here in the room today. There are two people on here that I would like to acknowledge. One is Dr. Shatila, who is our MSW program director, and the other is Dr. Blakey, who is the director of our School of Social Work. And the others are here. And so Rosetta, would you start us off with an introduction?
Rosetta Cheers, Practicum Program Coordinator.
Hi, Kelly Leaf. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming.
Katie Cobb, one of the practicum coordinators.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ashley Aggie, 4E practicum coordinator.
And there is another who's here somewhere in the building named Michelle. And we will all be talking at different points of the afternoon with you. Today is pretty interactive, and so talking with one another and talking in the group and letting this be a dialogue is important to us, and we hope that you find it useful as we spend the time together. Specifically today, we are looking to provide you with some information and some resources specifically to enhance your interaction with your students, looking at how do we talk about competency, how do we talk about evaluation, how do we do the demand for work, all the way to the leaving of the student from your organization. And so, as we get started, I will say that we have put together an agenda of what we think you might want to hear from us. And so specifically, we're going to talk about the 5 stages of the successful internship. You've probably heard some of those things before. we're gonna talk about, any kind of boundaries and accountability, thinking about the student and what does that look like. We're gonna talk about evaluations and specifically talking about what needs to get done in that evaluation process. And finally, what's next? What does it look like for your students? We are wondering, is there anything that you came here hoping to hear that you think wouldn't be reflected on this agenda? Is there anything you want to add? If you think of something throughout the day, know that you can add it by simply saying, we are open to adjustments.
This isn't that, it's more of a clarification
Yeah.
between the task supervisor and the other
Practicum
supervisor.
instructor?
Yeah,
Sure.
so I'm a task supervisor, so how
Perfect.
does this?
How does
apply?
this apply? Wow. Well, I hope that you'll find this very beneficial
Mhm.
to be here. And I hope that you see that there's a role in all of this for you. Not every student gets a task supervisor. Not everybody gets two people that care about their success. And in some cases, we do get two. You work as a two. And the idea of having a second person who might be the supervisor of a unit, might be trained in something other than social work, might be that you don't have a license or a degree in social work. So all kinds of reasons why we have task supervisors, and sometimes the social worker has to play both hats of being the person who is doing all of the role of task supervision and process supervision or training of the social worker. Totally okay. However, we're glad you're here. Okay.
Curious, yeah, how this gets sorted, yeah.
Yeah, so there's nothing here, so we have started using the language around practicum partners rather than field instructors, practicum instructors, task supervisors, all of that. Whoever we can get in the room, we're excited that you're here, because whoever we can influence with this information is really good. And there are some people who don't even have a student and they still wanna come to these trainings. So we support that, however, whyever you're here, we're glad you are. I wonder if we could introduce, if you would be willing to say, I'm gonna ask you to start us off. Who are you? Where do you work? And do you have a concentration or specialization student? Or do you have a foundation student? So, we have an agenda. This agenda is going to focus on 4 different areas. We're gonna wrap up talking about the 5 stages of what a successful internship is. We're gonna spend some time talking about some strategies for evaluation, focusing really on boundaries and accountability with our students, and then thinking about where developmentally your students are going next. Anything that you want to bring to today that you don't see on this agenda? Any specific needs of your students? Well, know that you can be as interactive with us throughout the time together as you would like. And I am gonna turn this over to Kate.
All right, so you should all have some blank paper in front of you. Does everyone have some blank paper? Okay, you should have 2 sheets. So for this activity, we'll use 1 sheet and then you'll use another sheet later. So let's start the morning a little bit of reflection. Everybody does this sort of in their own way. So we're gonna start off just on our own, doing some writing. And then the next time we do this, it'll be a little bit different. So stay tuned for those slides. But think about, take a few minutes, write down what is going well at your site. What are you really excited about? Where are the opportunities that you're seeing? What is going well? for you and for your students. I'll give you a couple minutes to jot down some thoughts. And then maybe on the bottom sheet of your paper, or the back side, depending on how much you wrote, I guess. Let's think about what needs more development at your internship. Could be something about the program, could be something about your student. Where are you seeing, opportunities for growth, things that can be worked on? I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that as well. Hold on to that sheet of paper because you're going to need it later. But we are going to move into some content now that you've done some processing. And we're going to talk about the 5 stages of a successful internship. This may or may not look familiar to you if you've been around or if you're new, but I would always encourage you to look into this a little bit further. This is from Schweitzer and King, and they outline the 5 stages of a successful internship. It's laid out in this very sort of linear, practical way. And my disclaimer here is that this is not a linear process, right? We sometimes have students who move through these steps very nicely and neatly and right on track. And then we have other students who go back and forth, or maybe something happens at the site and they return to a previous step. Students are all over the place all the time, right? As I'm sure you know. So that's my disclaimer as we walk through these. Starting off, stage 1 is the anticipation stage. This stage begins even before your student has arrived, right? It probably starts this spring when they're interning at your site, interviewing at your site, and they say, oh, this place would be awesome, how exciting. They start to wonder, and they spend all summer wondering, right? What is this gonna be like? Who am I gonna be working with? Are the people gonna be nice? Like, what am I gonna do there? They have all sorts of questions. They're very curious, they're very excited, they have a lot of energy, and they come to your place with that energy, right? And this stage can last for a little while into the internship. There may be some frustration during this stage because they're typically not doing anything with that energy. They just have to sit and train, right? Or be onboarded, or shadow, observe. And that can be a little frustrating sometimes for some students. Some students really like it. They're like, I don't want to go out there yet. You can spend like 3 months training me, that's just fine, right? And then you might have to kind of push them. But this can sometimes be a challenge with this stage, is you might have to kind of hold them back a little bit, right? The disillusionment stage happens when their expectations don't match up to reality and sort of the gap in between, right? Because they've spent all summer in the anticipation stage thinking about what this is going to be, it usually isn't quite what they think it's going to be, right? For whatever reason. And sometimes that's a really big thing, like maybe the entire internship. And sometimes it might be something small, like maybe the population they're working with isn't quite what they thought, or their supervisor isn't quite who they thought they'd be, But this gap between what they thought was going to happen and what is actually happening can be really harsh and can be really hard to work through. And that's the disillusionment phase. There's a lot of discontent. There may be some disagreement, some uncomfortable feelings. Michelle used the word icky in our previous training. Some icky feelings, right? The student feels icky. There are icky things going around at the agency, right? It's really important at this stage that the student doesn't stay there, right? And sort of simmer in that, because that's not good, right? We don't want them to be sitting in sort of that uncomfortable stage, and it might be something that they bring to you, it might not. You might just sort of feel it in the energy or in your interactions, and you might have to call it out. There's a lot of different ways to sort of go through this, but you really want to address the elephant in the room, basically, and make sure you work through it. Otherwise, you don't get to the 3rd stage, which is confrontation. And the confrontation stage is addressing that thing, right? And the student's probably going to have to adjust their expectations. It can be a really challenging stage to work through, right? especially if you're sort of conflict avoidant or you don't want to bring things up. But it's a really important stage to work through. The fourth stage is the competence stage, and we're going to get more into stages 4 and 5 as we go. So I'm just going to do like a real quick review. But the competence stage is, your student is feeling confident. They kind of know what they're doing. You can trust them to go and do things for the most part. Things are going relatively well, right? And then the culmination stage is the final stage, the termination stage. And it's really important to highlight this as a stage so your student just doesn't walk out the door the last day and that's it, right? And we talk to our students about this too, like, how do you want to wrap things up? Like, let's be really intentional about this. And not just with your clients, because that's really important, but like with your supervisor, with the people you're working with. These are important relationships that you're building that are probably going to affect you in your social work career. So let's be intentional about this. How do we celebrate what you've done? How do we take sort of the critiques or criticisms that maybe you've gotten throughout the year and build those into successes? It's a really important stage. Students are probably not paying much attention to this stage because they are very distracted, right? Your students, most of them are specialization, so they're about to enter the workforce, right? They're probably like, already, they're just like, I want to find a job. I want to get out there. I want to do something that's really interesting. Maybe it's your same internship site topic. Maybe it's not. So they're probably fairly distracted, and you kind of have to pull them back into this stage. Let's do a quick poll just by a hand. What stage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do you think your student is in? By show of fingers. I'm seeing a lot of 4s. 4s. A couple 3s maybe. Okay, that's good. Right on track. 2, 3, 4. We're alternating. Okay, that's good. There's always at least one of those. Yes. So good thing you're mostly at stage 4 because we're going to be talking more about that. And I believe Ashley, you're next.
Talk a little bit about competence. And by the looks of things, it sounds like your students are doing really well. And I think Katie mentioned this, that your student might ebb and flow, especially if they might, on their learning contract, they may have really focused on a few of them, and then you find yourself at the end like, oh shucks, we missed this last one. We gotta hurry up and get to it before the school year is over. And they may not feel as competent in that one because they didn't have as much time, and that's totally normal. But know that ebb and flow is totally fine. So with competence, just as a review and reminder for you all, when we think about this, before we get into what I have to say, I want to hear you all. So quick question. When you all think about your agency, you think about your student, your intern at your agency, how do you all measure competence at your agency? I know it's like lunch and people are like ready to take a nap. I hear you go.
I know so I have 4 students right now, and I would say that one of the measures is when they know when to seek collaboration, consultation.
So you find that students who are kind of maybe not in that stage yet, they feel like they can't ask for help, can't ask for support, and
It's
just kind
either like I'll do it all and then deal with it after, or I will not do it and just give it to you.
Okay. Yep.
There's just like this in between. That is sweet.
I like that. Thank you for sharing. Others, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed is when the clinician can shift from this is the way I see it to the other opportunities of ways to look at a situation. Because so often it's like, okay, I got this, and then there's more information that needs to be added to.
Catching those nuances.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Others.
Mine is, I don't have to go through their notes with a fine tooth comb before I post them.
You don't want to read your notes and they notes too much.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Cause I can just have
have that trust that, you know, they did what they're supposed to do and they documented appropriately, like, and just skim over to make sure the key things are there, goes on and move on.
That's perfect. I love that.
I work in the schools, there's a lot of group work, so when they can independently, do the lesson plan, run the group, give me feedback on how relationships are doing, and then know.
Doing their thing. I love that. Two more. We need two more.
Prioritizing the tasks and the schedule, and being able to do their own scheduling without us saying, at 9 you're gonna be here, at 11 you're gonna be here.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
let him
yeah.
just do his thing, so.
I like that. I like that. Yes, and you, Shani?
We're not a direct practice, so being a macro social work agency at the state level, and never feeling like you're really competent. What I have looked for with him is an ability to make connections between the federal laws and state policies that guide the work for DHS, and then to be able to bring that knowledge set into the different spaces that he's in on a day-to-day basis, and make connections between our efforts to address the inequities within our child welfare system, and to understand the work that we're doing in these different spaces all day, how it's trying to move our system along towards a more equitable child welfare system. So it's just it's different because he's not doing any sort of direct service with children and families. It's more macro social work.
But what he's doing is helping those of us who are in micro practice know what we should be doing and how to do it in best practice. Thank you for sharing. Well, thank you all. Any last quick people want to jump in there real quick before we move forward? All right, cool. But yeah, you all had it. I mean, really, we can just go home now. Y'all got it. You know, y'all can do this presentation, okay? But exactly, what I love to hear is that you all hit these points, and we're gonna go to the next slide in a second. But I want to direct your attention to the key points of practicum when we think about how we're measuring competence, and that's knowledge, value, skill, and then that fourth one is cognitive and effective processing. And I heard all four of those from you all today, and so I just want to acknowledge that you all are on the right track and you're doing exactly what we're hoping you all are doing with your intern. Heidi's gonna lead with me on this one, but I just wanted to share a little bit. When you think about these four key points that we look for when we're speaking to competence, trust and believe that in the classroom, that is where students are getting that knowledge. That's where they're learning about the modalities, they're learning about theories, they're learning about, we're doing some self-reflection, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about community, diversity, different things of that. But when they go to your internship, the hope is that they're also learning about the population that you all serve, thinking through the kind of particular theories and modalities you all use. Because of course everybody's not doing motivational interviewing. Everybody's not doing task solution focused therapy, right? You all have the modalities and theories that you use specifically at your agency. And so it's important that students know and are able to articulate what they're using and how they're using in their practice. And then we think about the skill, and that is where students are practicing that. So we're getting a little bit of that in class. We do role play. I was one of those students, I did not like role play. But we have to do them, we gotta practice. But also you all might be doing role play at your agency with them, right? Preparing them for an interview before they get in there, preparing them to do a DA before they get to their clients. You are able to journey that with them and walk them through that. And then you're talking about, but then skills, we are doing it a little bit in the class, but we rely heavily on you all at the practicum to do that, to assess how you're seeing them when they get their own clients, when they get their own members, when they get their own community people. When they are doing the work, you all are assessing them and observing them and being able to provide them with some critical feedback. I know sometimes that can be hard for students because we don't want to, kill their spirit. They're excited, they're ready to change the world. But it's important that we're able to give them some of that constructive feedback, not just for them, but also for the people that they serve. We want to make sure that they're being served well. And so we are definitely relying on you all heavily on that. And then you think about value, when we think about, I think also about our personal values. Do you understand and know what your students' personal values are? how that moral injury can happen. Sometimes when they have to make decisions or do certain things that may go against their morals and their values, are you able to have those kind of conversations with them? Do you know what those are for them, those important things about them that kind of led them into the work, and then what also conflicts them about the work? Me as a child protection social worker or a former child protection social worker had a lot of that complication in me. In me, I wanted to, part of my values is family. I grew up in a multi-generational home. My mother was a single mother, had my grandmother there, so that's all I know. You know, my father was in and out of prison, and so being able to be with families and journey with families and keep families together was my main objective. When I got there, so different sometimes. So when I had to make my first call to remove a kid from a home, I'm watching the heartbreak of this mom, but I'm also feeling it inside. And I'm trying to think through, how else can I deal with this? How else can I be navigating with this family without removing this kid? And in that particular moment, I couldn't think of anything. I consulted and still couldn't figure out another way. And so I had to process that stuff out with my supervisor and not only support this mom in healing, but also doing some of that healing within myself. And so processing that stuff with them. But also we're thinking about, when we're saying values, we're thinking about the 6 core values. You all, the social work 6 core values. Do you all remember what the 6 core values are? I see some big smiles, like, ooh, don't say that to me. Anybody want to get us started? What are the 6 core values?
Social justice.
Social justice, yes.
Self-determination.
You know what? Somebody else said that earlier. We should add that. It's not in there, but it's kind of, you know. Dignity and worth of a dignity and worth of a person. Yes. Integrity. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Got 3 right. Got 3 more. Competence. Yes. All right, y'all on the roll. Got 2 more. One starts with an S. It's what you all do all day. Service. Yep. Service. And then that last one. I see some wheels turning. Importance of.
Isn't there like a
Well, advocacy, I think advocacy and social justice are kind of linked in. But the 6th one is the importance of human relationships. Exactly, yep. So yeah, we're wanting to make sure that our students not only know those 6, but also are being able to articulate how they're, practicing those 6 and keeping them in their minds as they're serving and being with the clients and being with not just their clients, but at work with our colleagues. I always tell my students, like, the 6 core values are really important, but we also have other ethical demonstrations that we have to think through, like dual relationship, like what happens if you have a conflict with a colleague. That's a big one, but it's a part of our ethics, and we need to know, how do we navigate that? So just talking to them through those different things, especially in supervision. And then the last point is cognitive and effective processing. And Heidi's gonna go in depth with that one for sure. So go on ahead, Heidi. I'll get it to you.
So I'm gonna back us up one quick second. Let's go here. And so this is Council for Social Work Education language. Very, very specific and clear. They are saying there are 4 ways to measure competence for students. Knowledge, values, skills. Those were 3 that have existed for a very long time. And it is only in the newest iteration of the Council for Social Work Education's expectations that we are looking at the cognitive and affective process that a student goes through. What do you think that means? Easy words to know? Cognitive, we understand that. That might be thinking. Affect might be feeling. What are they thinking and what are they feeling while doing this work? Right? Are they reading the room? Are they listening and paying attention to the nonverbals? We can outwardly pay attention in assessment to those things. Anybody got an example of a student doing that? Where you saw your student using that as a skill or using that or telling you about it?
Heidi, with the example that Shani gave, would that be a part of that piece?
I think so.
Especially from a
Absolutely.
macro perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Aware. Oh, it's the same language. You follow this from the feds to the state. I had a student who got some feedback recently that they were really struggling with being able to read the room. They were good at hearing what their client was saying. But if the client didn't verbalize it, they weren't reading the nonverbals. They weren't interpreting what was not being said. And they were missing a whole lot. It was like, let's do this blindfolded and all we know to do is to listen with our ears. And even then, it's only the words that come out, not the sighs, not the pauses, not the hesitation. But there's a lot that we pick up on in the affective and cognitive processing. But it's also really important in this process of looking at competence that we are talking about that with our students. What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? Because the importance is that if they don't do that, they might go askew. Their biases might lead them somewhere that we don't want them to be thinking that way. Or we might want to help shape that in some way. Have you had a student tell you that they don't like a client? Or this person's really hard to work with? Right? That's them expressing that cognitive processing. I'm not feeling like I can help these people. Well, what's going on? Tell me more about that. If we don't slow down enough to build that into the work, we're going to miss this. On the next slide, it's labeled the signature pedagogy of the MSW program. That's you. That's this program. The Council for Social Work Education says that we can do a lot in the classroom, but it's really what happens in the practicum that's important. What happens in the practicum sets the students up for their future. It sets them up to be people who have knowledge, people who have skills, people who know the values of social work, and also people who check themselves. And so as we think about our students going towards licensing and practicing as good ethical practitioners, we have to spend some time on that affective, cognitive processing piece. And sometimes we have to manage that ourselves. Sometimes we have to vocalize what we've learned to take for granted. And they're not going to get it just by telling them, right? We know that we have to model that for them. Because otherwise they think you've got a magic wand, or they think that you've got some magic that you haven't shared with them on how to do that. Thoughts about how you might help a student to do cognitive and affective processing.
things from the student, and then like thinking about how that could be improved on what went well, and like similar things for working with colleagues on the team.
Awesome, awesome. Anybody else have your student journal? Think about doing that. It's a great way to get some insight onto what their thoughts are. We ask the students to journal. Every student in seminar does a journal, does some information gathering for us. You're welcome to ask your students about the journals that they write for us. Maybe they'd share that with you. Maybe it would give you insight. They also might feel like, oh, that's a really scary thing to say because maybe I'm talking about how I'm feeling and I might feel vulnerable if I tell you that. Right? It might be that they're processing with us those concerns.
Alright, so earlier you all had a moment to do some self-reflection on what's going well at your internship, especially around competence. And so what I want you to do is I want you to turn to your neighbors. Y'all might have 2 or 3 people in your group, and so just have a conversation. We'll skip about 5 minutes just in case you all have a larger group. To just discuss what's going so well at your agency.
What I would love to hear from you all, if possible, 1 or 2 things that you all discussed in your small group about what's going well at your internship right now.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Oh yeah, can you share what maybe a brief summary of what you all talked about, what's going well in your internship?
I can share. Yeah. We kind of all had similar experiences with our students. So like all of our students seem to be really engaged and they want to be learning at each of our sites. Develop a lot of trust. They have a lot of good, strong communication skills. We trust that they'll, work with our clients and our partners, really building good relationships, and still able to be kind of vulnerable in a professional way and be able to share kind of where they're struggling or feeling or those thoughts.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all. I'm glad that you all are experiencing it. What about others? It's going pretty good. It's going well. I know y'all have stuff because I heard y'all a little. I was trying to speak over a little bit. Go ahead.
We discussed like just the level of independence that our students have to kind of and autonomy, just like and their student, this is their second career, so they've been really confident in their ability to like do things, and it's good. They're asking good questions, good reflection.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. What about others? Couple more groups you have to hear from? Yeah.
I think for us, like I said, it's just been developing an internship from scratch. We probably didn't have, this was the first intern our unit has had, and there wasn't like format, and everything's virtual. There's no building. We're not in a space where I can send him to go do this, or like everything's virtual. So I had to make it concrete and kind of come up with some visual stuff so I could just try to put together what is he going to do? What am I going to have him actually accomplish to demonstrate what he needs to demonstrate? And so I think considering that, we have been able to put together a pretty awesome internship as far as macro social work goes that I would have killed and so I'm excited about how he has experienced it, and then the possibilities for bringing additional students into our unit moving forward. So just considering how abstract state social work is these days, with policies, best practices, legislative stuff, like that's all super abstract, kind of big thinking picture stuff, to actually be able to kind of break it down into an internship has felt pretty good. I was pretty proud of what we were able to pull together for Josh. So.
I love it. I think Katie mentioned it earlier. He said, maybe I'm missing it from last session, but Katie mentioned that the 5 stages of successful internship is for students, but it's also for us as
as you all are supervisors. And so Shani, I hear you saying, like, I'm feeling confident over here. Okay, I did a pretty good job creating this internship. And I love to hear that. And so I'm glad to hear that it's going well. And you brought up another point. How many other people have either hybrid or virtual learning with their student? Yeah. And so, yeah, kind of, yeah. And so that sometimes can be hard. I know that I support some of the students at Ramsey County, and you know, they have a hybrid model this year, but I think a couple years ago, and that's probably all of you, we were all virtual. And so how do you, you know, hold your student accountable when you all are not in the office? And how do you measure the competencies and things of that nature? Or how do you observe them when you're not even in the same space together? And so it sounds like Shani, and I'm sure others, you all have been able to figure out some creative and innovative ways to measure, to assess, and to see your student when you might not physically be sharing space with them. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Others, real quick, anybody else want to share just what your group mate had talked about? Yeah.
We also talked about like just the building confidence being something that's going really well. And I think whether it's like students just being able to like say, this is what I'm gonna do versus like asking permission. And I think also with growing confidence, like that being kind of like a lowering anxiety, which like I know for my student has allowed her to like just be more self-reflective with clients and be able to notice like what's her own stuff coming up versus like what's maybe client stuff, and like kind of make more like mindful choices about directions. So I think that's been really cool to see.
Yeah, it makes me, it reminds me of a student I have who just awesome student. And during our last supervision, they mentioned that, you know, they were in a session with a client, and they were triggered in an area that they thought they had well past healed. And so being able to come to me and talk to me about, you know, some of those things that they were dealing with, part of competence is also, and confidence is also saying, I think I need to go to therapy. Maybe I need to go back, maybe I need to go, but I recognizing that I need a little bit of something to heal some of these spaces that maybe I didn't know, maybe are just kind of coming back up, because we do dive deep when it comes to social work. And so being able to assess what they have going on, and being able to like lean on you all for support, but also recognize when they may need some external support too. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else before we move forward? No pressure, you know, no pressure. All right. So thank y'all so much for sharing awesome stuff. So before we move on, or before Michelle comes on up, what I'm gonna ask you all to do is take a moment and get back into your small group. And I want you to talk a little bit more about what you feel needs more development. Where that could be within your intern, where that could be between you and your internship relationship, that could be within their learning. As I mentioned before, sometimes we have some of those IPT learning goals that we really focused on 3, and those last 2 just kind of hang in there. And so that might be something. But also think about your agency. Are there things that you want to see more structure in your agency, more preparation with your agency when it comes to entering a student, more onboarding, whatever. So think through and get back into your small groups and have those conversations. We'll take another 5 minutes. The next voice you'll hear will be Michelle. Would anybody like to share out what has come about in your discussion already about what needs more development? Do we have a brave soul? Or should I give you the awkward eye contact, meaning that I want you to speak?
I'll go.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I've been working with my student on is documentation. And like I feel like she was really quick to jump into, you know, what modality to use and how to do a session, but the like reflection and documenting it on the other end of it has been is good. She's just writing way too much. And so us working together of like hearing the session first, so her like that I'm not having the documentation open, so she just kind of like reflects with me of like what happened in the session, and then we look at the notes that she wrote, and then I can go through and kind of say like, okay, take some of this out, add some of this in, and really thinking through that. For me, that's where I learned how to document was in my internship, and that was like the foundation for going forward in my career, and so I want to make sure she's done this year.
Okay, so clinical writing.
Yeah.
Like conciseness of clinical writing specifically.
And what needs to, like, what actually needs to be in there, and, yeah, yep.
Good deal. I do have a response. I'm gonna push it to the next slide and you'll see why.
Okay.
I'm just gathering info right now. Who else would like to share?
I think just like knowing when we've done as much as we can, even though we didn't solve the problem. I think that's something that we all are gonna struggle with for our entire careers, like, but we get better at it. I think that's just something, especially like my organization's huge, I'm healthcare, you've all heard the drama that's going on between the University of Minnesota physicians and Fairview Health Services, so it's a lot of uncertainty within my position in the organization, and so my student sees that, and so, you know, it's just things that are greater than us, what we can control and what we can't control, and learning how to advocate without burning ourselves out.
Okay. So teaching them how to be a self-worker. Got it.
Basically.
Okay. And you were gonna say something as well?
I was just saying, I think, working on a more structured onboarding process, it felt pretty haphazard this year. But again, it's our first intern with our specific unit. And then establishing some relationships in some manner to be able to recruit from our marginalized communities. This African American Child Wellbeing Unit, we're focused on reducing disparities for Black children in the child welfare system and reducing the number of children in out-of-home care, Black children. It would be nice to be able to recruit most people in social work are white women. It would be great to be able to form some relationships to recruit from underrepresented communities in social work, to be a part of our unit, so.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, you're more so reflecting on just the infrastructure of the organization, not the infrastructure of the support the university supplies you in.
Is that what we were supposed to be talking about?
It doesn't matter. Development is development. It doesn't matter if
I
it's,
felt like
yeah,
the
that's,
support from the university was sufficient. I didn't
Okay.
feel like it was that, it was more Department of Human Services being 8,000 people and completely virtual.
Okay.
And just figuring out how to structure that internship within our specific unit. Is more, so yes, more internal.
Okay. So internal, and that's important for us to know too.
And then the recruitment pieces from you guys too, though.
Okay.
I feel like the university has an obligation to be recruiting from underrepresented communities. We would love to pull students of color into our unit, but we're working from the pool that we are given. So what is the U doing to recruit more students?
Take the charge, take the charge. That's received. Thank you for that. Anybody else? I'll do one more.
As we're entering this, like my student feeling quite competent and me observing her as being quite competent, I've been mentioning, kind of discussing how I think we need to be more intentional to go back into that reflective, making time for reflection, like change and growth there, because a lot of our supervision has started to kind of deviate into task check-ins and the work of our internship changed dramatically a couple weeks ago because we do legislative work. So we got to the Capitol and like everything just kind of gets turned on its head for a little bit. So there's, I see competence moving into some disillusionment again, like people having ideas of what the work would be like, or personal biases of what certain people's opinion, like legislators based on their political party, what they assume their intentions are gonna be, or what their point of views are gonna be, not all those things being challenged a lot. So I'm noticing that, it's just really important that for me, I need to get us back to really making sure that we take the time for that reflection and processing. Even, because I think sometimes when you get to that competence stage, we can get so task oriented.
Right, like I got it now, so all I need to do is boom, 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 I'll be done.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Good information. So I am gonna ask you all to multitask a little bit. Carry that information in the back of your head. We're gonna find it relevant when we move on to the next few slides. The reason that I ask you all to share out is so one person who is ideally going through like, okay, how can I show up more intentionally with my student versus someone who is struggling like, hey, I need to make sure that they understand what clinical writing looks like. Sometimes we might be experiencing that with our intern, and maybe we've named it, maybe we've not, but it's always good to have communal knowledge. So, in that, let's talk about the learning contract. It is almost virtually impossible to create some kind of flow chart and metric data from every single day of your student's experience. We might have a student that is in full thriving competence mode where you can see that they're carrying that information very well, they're using it, they're integrating it, they're comparing it to old experiences, they're evolving with it. Or you might see a student that is still struggling with some of the basics like clinical writing, communication, email response, et cetera, et cetera. In that, we have the learning contract, which is essentially the governing document which only can produce a certain amount of available data. Maybe it includes metrics, maybe it includes concise reflection on what type of learning strategy has emerged or how it's materialized, maybe, maybe not. But the learning contract is essentially that governing document that says, this takes the biggest picture and the best picture that we can give you of your learning and justify it to this organization. Now, how we kind of set that up is in the initial part of it, last semester, you all received probably some very generic emails from us, like, hey, the initial contract needs to be in by this date. Hey, everything then needs to be signed by this date. Hey, we need to do a mid-eval by this date. This semester might be a little different because we have students who end their practicum at different places. So you all might get some varying dates on when to complete that final eval. But in the beginning, we start everything that we're talking about now from that point of development. We started it here in the initial. So what are the goals of your organization? Because we're specializations right now, you all might have goals that are a little more specific to modalities, stages of engagement, stages of change, things of that nature. Really being able to materialize and piece each modality out by segments, and then you'll be able to see how that student is integrating with that learning as it goes. In the initial part, you'll see the objectives that were identified. But what happens when you get to that mid-eval, and then some things have changed. But the semester is moving so fast that December 8th came and gone. And here we are, 2024. How we got here this fast, nobody knows. But December 8th, you all completed a mid-eval, which included just this first snapshot, this touch point of, hey, this goal you're doing really well. Objectively, you've produced this. Subjectively, it would be better if you did that, et cetera, et cetera. Essentially, it's going to be, or it was intended to be a very similar to a performance review. Not like a performance improvement plan, but a performance review like in standard employment. This is what you've done so far. This is where you're at. Here's that mid-touch point. That should have been completed by December 8th. But now as we approach this final eval, we're trying to provide some information to you that will give you this robust collection of information. Numbers are the most easiest thing to give you that picture. I will complete 10 diagnostic assessments by the end of my internship. You can very clearly hear what is gauging or measuring that learning, the number of 10. The production of 10 diagnostic assessments should be able to successfully identify that I can diagnose, assess, and look for symptomology and produce a statement that says this is why that diagnosis is attached, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens in an organization that so far we're here in March almost practically, if that number is 10, but my student has only gotten 4 complete because we don't have a lot of clients that are engaging with our service right now. What do we do in that kind of situation? How can we still provide robust feedback in order for our student to know that they've obtained some type of learning or exposure to it? An example that I've given in some of my liaison visits is, hey, if your student has gotten 8 complete diagnostic assessments, if that's the goal, have them consult with a peer on 2 more, and then have them bring those cases back to you and actually provide some type of reflective supervision so that supplementally, even though your organization hasn't been able to give 10 diagnostic assessments because of engagement levels, you still honored that 10 in some way. You still made space and room for their learning opportunity. Now, when we incorporate the development, so we just reviewed what can be developed a bit further. This final eval, hypothetically, we have a student that ends their internship in June. So that final eval should be in towards the end of May, hypothetically. If we get to May on that final eval, and we are just now seeing that our student is not obtaining a certain higher level of competence, what's the issue with that?
No time to correct it.
Well, that was likely presenting itself earlier.
just realized that and
Measuring competence can be tricky. When to have the right conversation, how to formulate that conversation, trusting your gut on like, this is probably a skill that should have been further developed by now. When did I first notice this in my student? Though the entire onus is not on you as practicum instructors, there's accountability to the student to show up and say, hey, I don't think that I'm quite getting this. Sometimes there's signs, sometimes there's not. But when we talk about competence, numerically, it's easy to say, what is a 1, what is a 2, what is a 3, what is a 4? But what do those numbers mean, right? So if we get to June or whenever the final eval for your student particularly is due, and we're still rating our students, or might rate our students at 1, that lets us know that we should have had a conversation a lot sooner. Hypothetically, if a student is struggling so significantly with, we'll use clinical case writing because it's just on the top of my head. If we're rating our student at a 1 in May on clinical case writing and a specialization practicum placement, we should have had this conversation when you first started noticing that there were some gaps in their writing or their reflective ability to be concise, etc. Now, the charge to you all is to say, us practicum coordinators are ready to support. I get paid to do this. If there's a problem with my student, and I don't mean a problem with them as on a personal level, but if there's a problem with the work that they're producing, if I know about it in January, then I get to have the conversation with my student in January and say, oh, got it. You know what? Here's some resources this way. Here's how you can present a clinical case study a little bit more concisely. Here's some information that it sounds like your practicum instructor is asking you to include, is asking you to not include, et cetera, et cetera. So when you are rating a student at 1, it means that you would not want them to do that task independently whatsoever. Meaning that you would want to be there, you would want to observe, you would probably want to model it, you would want them to see how it's done to a standard that is judged by your organization. So if there's a diagnostic assessment, easy example, if a diagnostic assessment is expected to be completed in a certain style and fashion, and you do not believe that your student is even remotely ready to do it, then that would be where you would rate them at a 1. Now, if we get to June and we're rating them at a 1, we need to have a conversation now, like right now, like yesterday. 2, approaching expectations is essentially, you know what, they're starting to get it. They're starting to reflect a little bit differently. The language that they're using is starting to shift from a more subjective state of, well, I don't think, I don't want to, you know, what I'm starting to notice is this is what I'm observing, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sorry, I'm a clinical person, so I might speak more clinically. So for my CP and macro folks, I'll do my best to make my language cross over adequately. But it at least shows that your student is getting something. They're starting to understand the concept a little bit. They may not be able to demonstrate competence or do this task independently. However, they're able to show you from day 1 to day whatever we are on now, I've gained just a little bit more to explain what this task is. I've been able to do a little bit more to show you that I understand it a little bit better. And then 3, when you are looking at the learning strategies and the goals, if you're rating them at a 3, you're likely going to say, my student has been able to show me consistently that they've had the exposure, the experience, they understand the information that needs to be used or included, or the things that they have questions about, they independently know, like, hey, I need to talk to you about something because this thing came up, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I want to get an understanding to know how to implement it, et cetera, et cetera. 4, we don't typically expect that all of our students will get 4s down the row by the end of their practicum. We're social workers, we're not really looking for perfection. We're the ones in the industry that typically accept imperfection in some ways. 4, you will want your student to be able to say, I am able to analyze this information, meaning that I'm using a very complex ability to digest information, to assess what I see, to maybe ponder on what that might mean, a spirit of curiosity to say, well, let me seek a little more information and integrate this into what I know a little bit more. That ability to use what you have and use what you see and put them side by side. Synthesize, meaning that after you put those things side by side, you're able to integrate that into some kind of formal product. So
I'm able to do an assessment on a person and then formalize using the information that I know about this population, know what I use about this symptomology, know what I use about this policy, know what I use about et cetera, and then produce a statement about what I am seeing. Client presented today with manic behavior as evidenced by blah, blah, blah. And then the evaluation piece is essentially something that you'll be able to hear your students say, you know, that didn't work out very well. And if it didn't work out this well with this client, I wonder if it didn't work out well with that client. So I'm thinking that the next time I get a client like who presents this way, I'm going to then do X, Y, and Z. You're able to hear them say, you know, from my own assessment, I don't think that it went well, and not from the voice of an imposter syndrome, where a student is actually doing very well and they're just questioning their work. Not from that voice, but from the voice of saying, you know what, I'm confident enough to say that that didn't really land well, and I'm gonna pivot a little bit next time when this happens. So I just wanted to give you all some context of what competence looks like. So in the final eval, we'll be looking for some more specificity to see how those learning strategies and learning goals have materialized. So when we say robust feedback, like I gave the example of 10 diagnostic assessments. It's easy to say what 10 diagnostic assessments were and were not completed. But what if you have a student that got really, really creative or really ambitious with a goal and said, I'm going to create a program for your community or for your agency that will then be able to provide this service? How do we maybe downsize and honor what the possibility of that goal was when we first started it back in September and say, well, no, you probably didn't create an entire program, but you did an overwhelming amount of research, but you had 15 different conversations with different collaborators or providers or interagency professionals to develop some kind of proposal. That's kind of the gist of what we're saying when we're looking for robust feedback or some type of specificity or metrics that show, hey, this goal materialized via blank, et cetera, et cetera. Any questions? Heidi, you want to co-lead with me on anything here?
You ready for me to move forward?
All right.
So I'm gonna take forward to this slide and say that we're really okay with your students meeting expectations. What would those expectations be? Are they simply what the goals are? Are they each of the 9 competencies? How will you know that your student has what they need to leave? Or not? Maybe they should stay a little longer. Maybe it might take a little bit for them to do another something so that they show you that they got it this time. Right? You have some grace from us to want that, need that, expect that from your student. It shouldn't be a surprise to them that you want them to do that, but it might be necessary. As we think about this idea of meeting expectations, we will be very happy when a student reaches a 3. Whatever that is our expectation, that they are meeting the expectations that you have of them. If they are exceeding expectations, and they are consistently exceeding expectations, use a 4. We don't want you to go through the student's learning contract and give them 4s on everything. We tell them that 4s don't happen unless they're doing really great, amazing things, right? A 3 is the goal. So if we're gonna go to the 4, the 4 says that they're doing some work that is over and above the goal. They are analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating something. And some of that you can expect in the process of the work that they're doing. So, what does it mean to analyze? How would that show up? What would a student be doing if they're analyzing something in your placement? I think your example between federal and state rules, federal and state verbiage, you're analyzing that, you're seeing that might be heading to a 4. They're getting the basics of the work and they're really getting it and doing something with it. What's another way that we might see analysis? In consultation, you're hearing that a landlord is evicting a whole bunch of people. Right? What's going on there? Why is that happening? There could be analysis of something, a trend, implementation of a policy, a nuanced something that's happening that your student is saying, we should really be looking at this. We should really be paying attention to this. This psychiatrist is over medicating every client that they're working with. Right? It's probably not that clear, but there's probably some analysis that's happening that they're paying attention to. Synthesis, how's that going to show up? You got a whole lot of data. Nobody's looked at it. I was in a supervision session with a social worker from a level 4 organization, level 4 teaching school. And I said, what happened to the kids when they leave your school? No idea. Who's reviewing the data of where these kids go? Do they graduate? Do they go to jail? Do they go to probation because they commit a crime? What happens to the kids at this school? No idea. No data. How do we begin to synthesize the data that's there or look at it? How do we begin to say, you know, we're working in a hospital setting and we discharge people to these facilities, and we should really go and visit those facilities and see if they're providing what we think they're providing. And your student might come back and say, I went and saw these places and I think that these two are really good and I'd question this third one. Right? Or evaluation. And this is really an important one because we want our students always to begin to recognize how do they evaluate their effectiveness. Right? They should be talking to you about if what they did or didn't do was effective. We should all be talking about that. However you want to collect that information, but this is really, are there ways that we could do what we do better? Could they think about reviewing our practices? Might they come up with some recommendations for us? This is over and above, and we're thinking that these things constitute a 4, right? Otherwise, if they get to a 3, it's a really good thing. And we want them to see that there's room for more. I'm gonna give you some ideas. This slide has a lot of information, but the biggest part of it is at the top. We're still learning as we walk out the door. What's the last thing that you want your students to hear, to see, to feel as they leave? Got an idea?
It takes years and a lifetime to become a good social worker. Like, we'll always strive for better, and everything will change, and there's never gonna be a point where you're gonna know everything. And so give yourself some grace for having to ask questions.
Great. So when I walk out your door, you're going to give me the gift of tolerance, patience, trust,
came from the word competence.
Okay.
I don't use it very often because
Yeah.
I don't believe it's really powerful.
Okay.
Like cultural competence, you're never gonna learn about every culture. You're not going to be that. So I think of it more as just be okay with that. Don't succumb to this pressure like you need to know every. I was a social worker for 20 years in child protection, and then I came to the state and I felt like I knew nothing. And that was a pretty hard transition for me to go from feeling uber competent to incompetent. So like, how do you recognize your learning growth, your learning cycles, that you should always be in constant learning mode, seeking out information and being okay with that. Like, you don't have to know, you're not going to, and if your goal is to feel like you know everything, then you're going to really struggle, because none of us, especially in this field where everything changes every day, all day. That would be the other thing I'd probably say is get used to change, because change is it's a constant in this field. At every level, and the more flexible, the more you can go with the change and be a part of it and active in it, have some agency in it, it'll help you not feel, it'll help with burnout, it'll help with frustration and those different things, if you could feel like you're an active part of the changes versus just a victim of it.
Or responded to it. I wanna say that we did not come up with the word competency in regards to our students. And we have a lot of students who see the achievement of competence or the lack of it as a judgment on their character. We have had this conversation over and over and over with our students about how this measurement exists and why it exists. And I would agree with you. The more that I know, the more that I'm aware that there is stuff I don't know. And the more that I learn, the more nuances that exist in my conceptualization of what I'm supposed to do. And it's pretty wonderful to get to that place of saying, it depends over and over and over again, instead of saying, I have the right answer. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Because we don't have that answer. We don't know. And you never know when things are gonna change, and you never know what you're gonna experience with the next person. I'll tell you an interesting story. If you can imagine that you're working with a child and the child needs to go to the hospital because they're feeling suicidal. One of the things that a school social worker has to do is they have to reach out to the parent to get permission or to be notifying them that their child's being transported to the hospital. So this therapist, social worker, is calling the parent to say, hey, we've got your child, they need to go to the hospital. And the parent says, can I talk to the child? Can you put me on speakerphone before you transport? Right? What do you think happens?
Talks him out of it.
Somebody talks them out of it?
Yeah.
Like,
Possibly.
don't go to the hospital?
Maybe.
Maybe. What else could happen? They're supportive. Maybe I'll meet you there. Never in a million years did the social worker think that the parent was gonna say, you know what, I'm suicidal too, and I'll meet you at the hospital, we'll both get admitted. Wow. Right? You just wouldn't expect it, you never know. And the social worker is pretty experienced, and it was like, I didn't see that coming. I didn't know how to prepare for that. How do I respond to that? Quickly take that parent off of the speakerphone and let's talk. Right? You never know. Was that incompetence? No. It just was something that happened that was unexpected. Our students are going to be learning from you all the way to the door. and maybe beyond. We've got 3 different areas of where we want to talk with you about how to continue the growth from now until then. In the skill mastery area, one idea is to ask your student to present something that they know. Present it to your team, present it to your organization. Get some experience being the presenter of. Some of it is that they might have a resource that they've learned about that they might tell you about. Some of it might be that they're talking about a great article that they read in their coursework that's relevant to the work that your organization does. There's all kinds of ways that you might ask them without having them do a whole lot of prep or extra, but to get the experience of talking and sharing and giving too. We use journals. Loved your example of journal writing. Process recording. Anybody remember doing process recording?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can do that in all kinds of ways, right? And the idea of process recording is a little bit of paying attention to that cognitive and affective processing, right? There's the verbiage, but then there's what were you thinking, what were you feeling, what were you observing, why did you ask this? And it gives you a sense of why they chose to go this direction instead of that direction. In family therapy, I use sequencing, and we get in a crisis and we go backwards with the family to talk about the pre-crisis time. And we say, and then what happened? And then what happened? And we do that. And at some point in that process, we say, what else could we have done instead of going there? And we begin to see where there are some choice and where there are some decisions that are being made and what they were seeing, right? That really gets to that cognitive and affective processing when we start doing process recordings. Exchanging feedback. This is huge. We want our students to give and receive feedback. Asking your students to give you feedback on something helps them to see that this is a normative thing, right? How could this have gone better? What could I have done to help this client differently? Lots of ways to do that. We talk about a leave behind. This might be a physical thing. Like we ask students sometimes to write a letter for the intern that's gonna come next year. What would you tell them? What do you wish somebody had told you before you started this? And sometimes it's a neat thing that you can put in a desk or in a drawer that they open up. Sometimes the leave behind is that they've organized something and now there's a resource for the next social worker who comes in, right? You can be creative with leave behinds. One of them that we like to recommend is how do we get the students to review the agency's IPT profile and see if the language in it is inviting and correctly reflects the experiences they've had, right? Maybe they can help you to think about, these are things that I was able to do here, that if you included this in your profile, more students would be interested in coming here. Or I've been talking with my friends and they really like this as an opportunity that happens at your organization and it's not in your profile. What else do you think might happen on skill mastery and exchange? Anybody got any wise tips to share? I turned the heat down, it was up to 75 in here. You can probably feel it.
Our intern has, created, a toolkit. So like, something that a tool that we will be using, moving forward. So like actually, creating a project that's gonna now expand. It's something that we hadn't had a lot of capacity, but she had the skill set and the interest and to be able to, do that work. Which is
Wow.
really great.
Awesome. Anyone else? Can it be maintained?
What do you mean, like that? Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Just gonna say ours, actually towards the beginning of our internship, was pegged to try and do a competency on food insecurity. And so she put together a whole thing on food insecurity and how it relates to the veterans we work with and broader community and that will be used moving forward for at least the next couple of years until it's reevaluated and changed.
Awesome. That's great. There's a lot of things that you might do, your student, I love the messaging on both of these examples of that the student brings their own personality, their own interests, their own skills to your organization, and you capitalized on it. That's really cool. Thinking about intentional closure, how do you say goodbye to your students? What do you do?
We'll have a couple spaces, he's been shared all over our division, so we'll probably have, they'll be virtual, and then we might try to get in person and just do some sort of a meal together, cause
Nice.
we're big on eating. And you have to do that together, you can't, you can do it virtually, but you have the same
Yeah,
impact,
so you might take your student to lunch?
Yeah, we'll go get some food.
What do you expect from your student?
Feedback.
Feedback? Okay, so some time to talk. What else? They ask us, do I need to do something? Should I get them a card? Should I bring them a plant? Should I buy them a coffee? What should I do?
I'd be curious what the conversation is, because in my many years of doing interns, I have had them give gifts. And then it's the wondering ahead of time, like, should I always have a gift ready? Because if they give me a gift, just that discomfort. Or sometimes when I did my field placements, I got a book that was relevant. It was given to me by my supervisor. A book that was relevant to what my internship was about, which was nice. So it's kind of the notion of how, do, when, is the role of gift giving.
Absolutely, and our students question it sometimes just from the concept of, it's in the code of ethics that I'm not supposed to accept gifts or I'm not supposed to give gifts, and how does that work with my supervisor, right? And they need some navigation with that. Not that we're gonna say, go and get them a gift, but we do tell them to put words to it. We do ask them to be clear of your appreciation, of your time, of your energy, of your feedback, of your training. How they want to do that is up to them. So what do we guide them on? We say, you can do what you want. You can do whatever you feel is appropriate. And we never say, go buy them something. We get a lot of people who say, we're really creative about what is the actual or virtual or metaphor of a toolkit. What will students need as they start their career as a social worker? A lot of people are creative, do interesting things. Sometimes chocolate is a nice exchange, or a coffee is a nice exchange, a cactus. You've got a prickly student, Candace is prickly, right? There's all kinds of ways. Mostly what we want you to do is to plan for it. Whether that's to plan a backup if you want a backup. How do you get their keys? How do you get their badge? Where do they have to put that? Do you need to get a computer from them? Make a plan on how you're gonna do it and make sure that they know that that's gonna happen. We have some practicum instructors who struggle with the closure and they don't show up on the last days. You'd be surprised how often that happens. And then there's like, well, we'll get together next week or the week after or something. And there's no closure. Right? And so be as able to do the work as you can because the students need to experience good closure with you so that they can do good closure with others. All right? Anything else about intentional closure from the crew in the middle that we want to say? One piece that I want to put here, which is really easy and we're really good at, is we're really good at writing on the learning contract from our keyboard and putting feedback there, right? The student's doing it, you're doing it, and we hit save on the learning contract, and we might miss the piece where we sit down together and talk, right? We might miss that piece of having dialogue about what did a 3 mean to you and what did a 3 mean to me? What does it mean that you want me to do this lifelong learning on something? Am I really that bad? Why did you write that? It's a really important piece that the students hear the feedback from you and not just read about what your thoughts are. And so take the time, plan the time, maybe a week before they're done, to put this information on the learning contract and have a conversation with them. It goes better than you can imagine to do it that way. And sometimes we slide in some feedback that maybe we're not so comfortable to say, and that doesn't work. They might not receive it well, and then it's awkward, right? Or they don't understand the tone that you wrote that with. So try to pay attention to having that intentional closure meeting on their learning. This last part is all about ethics of closure. And there's a couple pieces on here that I want to make sure that we definitely talk about. Are you going to offer employment? Are you going to write a letter of reference for your student? Can they return? Can they be a volunteer? They need to know all those things. And having a conversation with them about those things is a really good idea, so it's not awkward when you're sitting next to them later. Right? This element of confidentiality, I have a very clear example of why that's on there, and it is because students are curious. Really, really curious, and they struggle with ambiguous loss. They struggle with what's going to happen with these clients when I'm not here. I'm curious how the court hearing went. I'm curious how they're doing today. And so if you meet up with them, they need to know ahead of time, we're not going to talk about that clients anymore. I'm not going to tell you this information. I can't tell you because of confidentiality. And I say to the students, it's really important that you honor and respect your supervisor and don't go to lunch with them and ask them to break confidentiality for you, just to satisfy your own curiosity. Don't do that, right? And if we talk about it in advance, then we don't find ourselves sitting in an awkward spot saying, oh, you know, it's just the intern and, you know, they work with this family and it probably isn't a really big deal if I tell them about this, right? Don't put ourselves in that spot where we're tempted to break confidentiality for a client to satisfy the curiosity of our students. Any questions about that? Anybody disagree with that? Anybody got a reason why that doesn't work or doesn't apply? We're trying to give that message to our students because it can create a lifelong respect of our confidentiality, right? Some of your students are going to be looking for supervision or licensure. They might want to ask you, can we sustain this relationship and would you provide supervision for me? You don't have to do that. Maybe you're not even eligible to do that. But having the conversation with the students ahead of time might help you with some awkwardness later. Okay? All right, I want to talk a little bit about looking ahead. We're maybe going to get you out to enjoy the weather a little bit early. We have a few things coming up. We have about 40 students that are going to be starting summer placements. They are currently interviewing and wrapping up interviews for summer placements, but they start the 1st of May. We're super excited about that. I want to tell you that 40 is kind of a new high number. And the reason that 40 is a new high number is because in the fall, we changed our tuition structure. What used to be that a student could take 6 to 14 credits and pay the same price, and we called that a tuition band. We went to every class has X number of credits and each credit costs X dollars of money. Now, pros and cons of that. It's really good in the concept that it doesn't cost more to spread it out. There isn't a punishment, financial punishment, to say, I can only handle 10 credits this semester instead of 14. And it allows our students to look at the possibility of doing some classroom work during the school year and an internship in the summer. We're paying attention to how this is impacting our students. We think that we're going to see more students in summer placements than we've ever had, because we think that they're going to try to take care of themselves in this process more frequently than not. So that's something that's happening. We have a lunch planned to celebrate you and to say thank you from the school. It's on May 3rd at the Wilder Foundation. Please look at your calendars. This is a different date than we've told you before. Before we told you a date in April, and we've had to move it to May 3rd because the college is requesting that we are all somewhere else.
Will our interns be invited to come with us?
Your interns are invited to come with you. They are expected and wanted to be there. And we look forward to all that's going to come on May 3rd. The next item on here is something called the paid virtual event. Nobody's exchanging money. PAID is an acronym for Practicum Agency Information Day. That used to be called Field Fair. It's a trick. It's a subliminal message. The Practicum Agency Information Day is your opportunity to have dialogue with the students from 5 different schools, 5 different MSW programs ahead of the interview process. It gives the students an opportunity to ask some questions that they may or may not ask in an interview. It's from 3 to 5 o'clock. The invitations went out today. You may have seen them in your inbox. You may have not seen them yet because maybe you don't get that information. But the information went out from the 5 schools today, and you will get one invitation. And that covers all 5 schools. Okay? Interviewing starts on the 4th of April, and it goes for 4 weeks. And preferences are due on the 6th of May. Our students are super excited, as they are every year, to get you their information, and they will be waiting on the 7th of April, and they will be asking us, how soon do I reach out to the organization again to tell them that I really want to do an interview with them because I really want to do my internship there. And so, however you plan your own schedule, know that they're eager. And I'm not saying you have to be responsive, I'm just telling you that at some point, letting them know that you've decided to interview them or not interview them and what your schedule is will save you some contacts. Right? Because they will hear from us, you know, give it 4 or 5 days, maybe a week, and then reach out and see. Maybe the person's on vacation. Maybe the person's busy or overwhelmed. Right? Any questions about interviewing for next year? All right. This is information that we have that we think might be helpful to you. We have orientation planned for our new incoming students. Those are first year students and advanced standing students. So first year is 80-10, advanced standing students are 80-30, and second year returning students are called 80-20s. They're just the course numbers that get assigned to these different categories of students. But we have orientations planned, and for this top one, you'll see that there are 2 days of orientation. And that is not just practicum orientation, but new student orientation. And if a student doesn't come those 2 days, they can't participate in practicum placements the fall, spring. So as you're planning for your orientation for a student, you want to watch that it's not in conflict with this one. Because the students will find that they need to be at the university on those 2 days. You can do yours before, you can do yours after, but we're saying to the students they have to be at the school for this orientation. All right? We also have an in-service day, and you'll see that the specialization level students are in the morning and the foundation level students are in the afternoon. This current year, we did a full day, 8 hours with them together, and the feedback that we got was that they really felt like they needed to be in different spots. So we're gonna try it different, okay? I wanna provide you with a little information about some things that are happening at the university that are slightly different than previous. We've recently received a grant to start an LADC MSW program. It's very exciting that the state sees that there is such a demand and such a need that they have said, we will pay for you to develop and implement the first 3 years of funding to do an LADC program. that is open to you if you wanna join. It's going to be 5 classes that are add-ons to the MSW program. Students can use some of their elective credits for these 5. The biggest difference is that to become an LADC, you have to have 900 hours of an internship. It's actually 880, but we're saying it's 900 because we're really comfortable with 300 hours each semester. 300 for fall, 300 for spring. You end up with that 600 that the MSW program requires. So we're looking at adding summer on the back end and doing another 3. And you'll see that students will be in a placement for the LADC for the full 12 months. St. Thomas is adding an LADC program as well. They're implementing for the fall. They've capped their program at 8 students. We're not capping our program. We're leaving it open and we'll probably start in January. That's our goal. And part of that same grant was that we were able to secure funding from the state to look at how ASWB exams and data are working for students or not working for students. If you've watched or heard any of the data from the ASWB licensure exam information, you've seen that there's huge discrepancy between racial identification and who passes the exam. Based on where you're born, what your first language is, what color is your skin, people are passing or not passing at alarming rates. And so part of what we've done is we've said we want to help our students make sure that they pass. We have a 94% pass rate right now. But for the students who struggle to pass, it's usually not one time that they take the exam, but more than one time. And it's an additional burden financially on them. Our students are curious and cautious and anxious about taking the exam. So we're going to implement an exam prep class for them that's going to happen next October. We're going to provide the materials for them. We're going to provide the in-classroom support for them. And participating in that also gives them a really cool advantage. And that advantage is that if they did that and they take the exam and they don't pass, we're going to pay for them to take the exam again. Because what statistically we know from this new released research is that people who don't pass the exam the first time, a lot of them walk away from the profession. And we don't want those students to walk away from the profession. So we're gonna pay. The trick, and maybe you help us with this, is that there is a whole lot of shame attached to not passing. And the only way that we're gonna know to pay for the exam is if they're willing to tell us that they didn't pass. And a lot of people won't tell. A lot of people get in a shame spiral and sit there and stay there and go get a job somewhere else. So if you hear about it, encourage them to come back to us. Encourage them to reach out. The Memorandum of Understanding, I think Rosetta and I are going to be spending the summer somewhere between our lawyers and your lawyers and trying to get your signatures on a Memorandum of Understanding. Our general counsel has said we have to have a signed Memorandum of Understanding for every organization that we are going to place a student with for this next year. Many organizations do have contracts with us already that will preemptively be appropriate for us to use. But what happened this past year was that some of our students got into contract negotiations with their organizations and we weren't a party to them. And it put our students in a complicated position. And so we're gonna try to do some removal of the student signing things that we're not a party to. The other aspect that's on here is that our general counsel has said, we're okay with you providing a stipend to students, and we're okay that your students receive an hourly rate of pay for being at a placement, but we are not okay with students having a production-based contract with you. In other words, if they see a client and they bill for the client's work, and the organization gets X number of dollars, and you say, I will give, or they will give, or you can earn this much of that money. The university is saying, we can't do that anymore. We can't put our students in a production-based reimbursement contract with you. Any questions about that? It goes to labor versus learning, and we're really concerned about the students learning and not being part of the labor in that process. We'd love for them to get some money in their pocket, but many of the students go to a place of saying, my rent is dependent upon me seeing more clients. And they might not be ready for more clients, but they do it anyway. And so, I think you understand. All right, last bit. Thank you for being here. There are certificates of participation, continuing ed, that we hope you will pick up and have. And we will send you an evaluation of today via your email. So you don't have to do that. You simply get to go enjoy the 60-degree weather outside.